Iain Wares is described by his former pupil, BBC broadcaster Nikki Campbell, as the most prolific pedophile in British criminal history. He was found to be extraditable to answer to allegations of child abuse in the UK dating back more than 50 years. For more on this, we are now joined by Lamprecht, a child protection and development specialist. Luke, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, Luke, how is it that South Africa has one of the most prolific pedophiles from Britain living comfortably in Cape Town?
Well, it's something that confuses us as well because, you know, he began his career in South Africa, was moved to the UK where he actually went for treatment for urges to, you know, have sex with boys. He then ended up teaching in the UK, and after going for more treatment and more offences, he returned to South Africa where he taught for many, many years and then retired here. So, you know, he has spent a large amount of time in South Africa, and when the cases were brought against him in the UK, you know, the extradition order was granted, it made sense, and then it just seemed to stall. Now, the reasons for the stalling appear to have been related apparently to something to do with Brexit, something to do with reciprocity. So in other words, I'm not sure if there is somebody that the UK is wanting, you know, to extradite, or we wanting to extradite from the UK to here, and the South African government isn't extraditing, so there's no reciprocity. But the short part that we found very hard to understand is that in terms of the affidavit that he made, he acknowledges what he did. He just says it's not in the interest of justice to be sent back. Now, the interest of whose justice is our question. So, you know, we are just saying, you know, if you are truly remorseful, go back and face the charges because, you know, in the interview with the UK men, you know, they're saying that the system and its delay, the delay in justice is really the denial of justice. And these men feel their voices are not heard, and the system is breaking already broken men, as was quoted. So we are saying, you know, with all the complications that I've just spoken about, why does he not just return to actually face what he did over all those decades?
And some speak of the time that has passed between the crimes that have been committed to him now being a very old man. Does that change anything in the situation in how he then should be treated in terms of him now having aged and him having to face up to some of these charges?
Well, look, we don't believe that your age should be a mitigating circumstance. You know, the idea of people being called dirty old men is often for a very good reason. You know, the fact that you age does not make you less dangerous. And, you know, the idea that you can now be old and apply for some kind of, I suppose, compassion from people in the court, for me is very complex because when you were a very, very powerful man, you hurt little boys with zero compassion. So their young age made no difference to your behavior. Why should your age make a difference to how you are then treated?
Most certainly. I just want us to discuss South Africa's sexual offenders list. I mean, if someone has committed sexual crimes in one country and would then find citizenship in a different country, would they be included in the latter country's sex offenders list?
In our country's sex offenders list?
Yes.
Okay, no. So it's a very good question because we've actually had a case exactly like that, which was also a man from the UK who came to South Africa. And what happens is you only end up on the sex offender register if you have committed a crime against a child, a person with a disability, or a vulnerable person. And that crime has to be a sexual crime. So even sexual crimes against adults are not recorded on that register. So what happens is that you can, however, through Interpol make application for them to end up on the Child Protection Register, which is not the same as the Sex Offender Register. So the Child Protection Register is a register of people unsuitable to work with children. So we have someone who has just actually been extradited, well, not extradited, actually been deported from Australia to South Africa after committing crimes there, and has now been sent back to South Africa because he's South African, and application has been made for him to be put on the Child Protection Register, so he's a person unsuitable to work with children. But that does not put him on the Sex Offender Register. They're actually two separate things.
All right. Do you believe in your line of work and the experience that you've had with offenders that South Africa as a country generally is quite lenient towards such actions?
Actually, no. I must say not. So in my experience, sort of across the world and, the cases we have followed in, sort of in different countries, when our system works, it actually works very well. It's sometimes very slow, it's sometimes quite complicated, it's sometimes traumatic due to lack of resources. So, it's fraught with problems. However, when we get convictions and we get sentences, we actually have had a very, very good system put in place since really the advent of democracy with our new constitution. And we have extraordinary laws. In fact, we have more progressive laws than some countries, such as the UK, because one of the arguments that's been made against the extradition, because they're appealing and saying that that he mustn't be extradited, and they're questioning the constitutionality of Section 10 of the Extradition Act. And the reason they're doing that is saying that there's no equivalence. So in other words, there's no equivalent law in the UK as there is in South Africa for what he's been asked to be extradited for. And the reason for that is the laws in the UK refer to certain kinds of sexual acts as being different from other kinds of sexual acts. And it also refers to different crimes related to the genders involved in the crimes. Now, in our sexual offences legislation, all of that's been done away with. It's completely gender neutral, and all sexual acts are seen as equally serious, and there's no more prescription. So we actually are extremely progressive, and when our system works, it works extremely well. But, obviously with anything, we're a country of limitless needs and limited resources, and that hampers our system quite badly.
And with that hampering of the system, the Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, has been asked to expedite this particular extradition process. In between all of this, what then happens to those 42 men who are still waiting for justice to happen and are watching as this man lives comfortably in South Africa?
Well, we sort of create the impression as a country that we are powerless because, we cannot honor our commitment to extradite people to face the crimes they did overseas. Now, that creates a very, very bad impression for our country because, this is a place you can run to if you have committed crimes elsewhere, and you will never be held accountable for your crimes. So I think the impression that the survivors, which is in fact why they approached us, I think why the international survivors, sort of looked to us as an advocacy organization was to say, can someone please put some pressure from civil society on the government structures, because the way they perceive it at the moment is essentially we're harboring him. And as a result, he will die in luxury in South Africa and never be held accountable, and their voices will never be heard, and they will never see justice and him walking down the halls of justice in the country that he went to offend against them. So I think it creates an extremely bad impression of our country for survivors of abuse.
Well, that's it for this evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Lamprecht. That was Child Protection and Development Specialist Luke Lamprecht speaking to us there about the extradition process that needs to take place for Iain Wares,